Welcome back to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. It's fucking been a while, hasn't it? Like, subscribe, comment down below. Chapter 4. Powder Respite.
Do you suppose they're his?
Raktal asked to his cook, leading out the kitchen door to spy a Yule again while he made a pot of tea. His head cook, Megan, blew out a breathy laugh as she placed a lid on a pot of stew.
You think they're his? Those harpies are well into their years by now. Not babies. Plus, you know full well that humans can't make children. They're all sterile because of how much iron is in their blood.
Then why do you think he dotes on them so?
Raktal asked her again, taking out his aeration tumbler and throwing in a serving of leaves.
It's odd. I've never seen harpies act like that.
Maybe he just likes them. People are allowed to like other people, Raktal.
Megan chided, turning towards her oven and leaning down to check the crust on the breads. Her frilled, curling mane of glossy chestnut hair danced with the light in the fire, her wide eyes turning orange and yellow with the flames.
You're a blonde-haired dwarf who left the mountains to become a tea master, and you're going to jump on him for being odd now, eh?
Raktal glowered at her, but kept spinning his aerator, wanting to get the tea as unclumped as possible. It was true that he, Raktal Maul, never had the tongue for beer, brew, or spirit at all. He preferred teas and herbal brews, and set off into the world to become a master of it. He had found Megan Boomul in some doinky inn in the countryside, wasting away making porridges and oatmeal. He saw in her the talent he had as well, and brought her with him to this new town, hoping that they would find the solace of their passions in the snow-filled fields. A knock at the back door told him Pearlie had arrived, and he waved a hand to one of the kitchen staff as he slowly poured hot water over the tumbling leaves. The halfling woman stepped in while thumping the toes of her boots on the doorstep, making her blonde curly locks bounce.
Good morning, Raktal.
Pearlie called out happily, stepping into the kitchen with her basket of herbs. Raktal kept his eyes on his tea, making sure it didn't oversoak.
Good morning, Miss Hammond.
I last knew but you're some better as mild than Hemon. Don't you agree, Megan?
Pearlie asked the adorned, who did nothing to hide the shit-eating grin on her lips as she pulled bread from the oven. Raktal closed his eyes, breathing in deep through his nose as he started going through his favorite kinds of tea leaves. The halfling, for whatever reason, was smitten with him, and it took everything he had to not fall for her predations. Halflings, as all dwarven men especially knew, were the forbidden fruit of dwarven kind. Children came easy due to their shared lineage, but to even cavort with a halfling was enough means to be excommunicated from an entire clan, and he was on the edge as it was. He turned just enough to look at her out of the corner of his eye, and even that little glance was enough to make his heart beat faster. She was lovely as lovely could be. Her hair was as gold as his, and her smile was bright enough to even dim the sun's glow. She was around the same height as he, but still tapered at the waist. Her hips were round and sultry, and he had seen her wearing a dress once in her shop, low cut enough that...
I have your tea leaves. They came in this morning via Herbie Post.
Pearlie said brightly, snapping Raktal out of his mind's wanderings.
Thankfully he flew low enough that the cold winds didn't damage him like last time.
Raktal scooped the moistened tea leaves from his tumbler and set them into their strainer, placing it into a piping hot teapot. He then turned, wiping his hands on his apron as he spoke out softly towards her.
Oh, how lovely. I'll take them off your hands and get you your pay.
Pearlie nodded politely while smiling and looking right into Raktal's eyes, something that never failed to make his forehead bristle with sweat. As he turned to grab his expenses box, Pearlie gave his sleeve a tug.
Is that you over there with those harpies?
She asked, gazing out with wide eyes. Raktal nodded, using his other arm to grab his expenses box.
Aye. He came in with them for an early lunch. He's gone through one pot of tea already, and his little friends are making a solid dent into our bread loaves.
Are they his?
Pearlie asked in wonder, which made Rocktail chuckle as he pulled out a pair of silver shank coins.
They don't look anything like him, but why else would the two be hanging around him like that? The little hawk harpy is sitting so close I can't even see the air between them.
Megan hung her head forward, the measuring cups hanging in the holes of her straight horns rattling as she did. She then turned around, hands on her far thinner and rangy hips.
What is with you short folk? Do you think harpies just spring out of eggs fully grown? Don't you know how babies are made?
Oh, I do.
Pearlie said in a soft, teasing way, making sure her fingers brushed against Rocktal's as she took her coins. Rocktal whipped his hand away as Pearlie giggled, clearing his throat as he placed a pot of tea on a tray.
Better get this tea out. No good cold, after all.
Pearlie watched the dwarf bustle out into the busy dining room, letting her eyes cast down along his strong back muscles and trim waist.
What a specimen.
Everyone knows he's into elves. You'll be wasting your time.
Megan piped up as she took a tasting spoon and tried her stew, popping her lips a few times and adding a pinch of salt.
But pardon me.
Pearlie stammered in alarm, rounding on the adorned with a whirl of golden curls.
What do you mean he's into elves? I've never seen him with an elf the entire time he's been here.
Megan tossed her spoon into a far sink, looking around to her little number of assistant cooks.
Like, you need to remember to season the meat. You keep having things undersalted. Anyway, Yule is into elves. Came in with that redhead one, remember?
Oh, yes.
Pearlie said coolly, smoothing down her hair that had been frizzling with her instantly growing outrage. While she had been staring at Rocktal, Megan must have thought she had been staring at Yule.
I did see her, yes. Red hair, red eyes.
Megan paused, another tasting spoon bearing a sauce halfway to her face.
Red eyes? Are you sure?
Quite.
Pearlie said with a nod, watching Yule speak to Rocktal about tea.
I am sure of it. And I am quite sure she felt my mind.
Megan popped the spoon into her mouth, added some wine to the sauce, then tossed the spoon into the sink before turning to Pearlie.
Taking one of the blood-touched as a wife is a shrewd choice. No one will be able to sneak up on you with a knife, as they'll detect the thoughts even through the wall. Do you think he knows?
I don't know.
Pearlie murmured, watching Yule butter more bread for the hawk and sparrow harpy.
But I don't think he even knows about them. What if she is some kind of spy? Did this switch you to the Fae blood, you know?
Megan shrugged, taking off her apron in order to enjoy a short break. She was thinner and more lean than the halfling and knew that if she wanted a husband around here, she was going to have to start eating more.
It's not really a problem, Pearlie. Nor is it any of ours. His men-at-arms are bringing a bustling trade and are clearing the road ahead. Just let it go and it won't be a worry anymore.
Pearlie bit her lip as the little hawk harpy rubbed her cheek against Yule's arm, happily chewing on the bread, but saw Rocktal walking back towards the kitchen and fixed her face into a more pleasant smile to greet him. Yule finally managed to shake off Eris and Chikily, sending them to rest after their mission and lunch. The two were constant barnacles on his side, even when traveling here, and it felt like Eris had been missing him more than he had realized. Regardless, Yule decided to burn some time inside the main square of this picturesque little town, and went from business to business, poking his head inside to see what it was these people sold. A lot of it, much to his lack of surprise, was to the upkeep and refitting of wagon teams, a default template of many towns or villages along the trade roads. There were, however, plenty of stores that served far more normal pleasures, such as cafes, stores that sold more unique wares, and entire businesses dedicated to wasting time with card games and other such diversions. Then there were the stores for the adventurers and mercenaries, built around long-lasting rations, weapon trading, armor crafting, and outfitting. Yule liked these, as they had the same vibe and smell of a surplus store. The smell of waterproofing liquids, oiled leather, and that odd, dusty scent that he wished he could bottle into an air freshener. The young yellow Oni man who ran the store proved to be talkative, chatting up Yule as he collected money from a young, staggering woman who was gearing up to head back north. The group grew into a small collection as Yule began slowly pulling information from the locals, rangers, and trackers that had run-ins with the orcs to the west. When he had exhausted his time in this shop, he bid them farewell, making his way to the apothecary down the street. Yule pushed open the door, which made an odd grinding noise that appeared to be the alert signal to the alchemist who ran the joint.
Be out in a minute.
Pearlie called out from the back, and Yule could hear the melodic tinkle of glass vials and tubes being put into place. He folded his hands behind his back and strolled through the aisles she had set up, his eyes drifting along the many vials and bottles that sat in tidy rows, each attached with a label. Yule still had trouble reading the swirling, looping language, but could figure out a lot of the words. The same went for the line-based numerical system. If it's one thing that Yule learned, it was that anything involving more than one tally square meant business. Yule was leaning down trying to figure out what a small bottle of tincture did when Pearlie came around the wall to her alchemical studio, fluffing out her blonde hair.
I'm sorry there, how can I?
Pearlie's voice trailed off to silence when she caught sight of Yule, and her bright green eyes wide with apprehension as he stood up to his full height.
Oh, good afternoon, General Warlord. I'm sorry, I've just heard a lot about you and you're here in my store. My liege.
Yule is fine, Yule said, continuing to walk along the aisle and give her time to collect herself. I'm always curious about these kinds of shops. What all do you make out here?
Oh, mostly warming drafts, health potions, that kind of thing.
Pearlie said nervously, already wringing her hands from behind the counter where he couldn't see.
Can I interest you in anything? Perhaps a draft for memory loss?
Yule turned his head to the halfling, observing her. He had a few halflings in his unit now, and he was still not sure why they and the dwarves always seemed to have it out for each other. He found the race admirable in their tenacity to forge their own way, and they were amicable folk. This one here was a rather attractive specimen, though as he thought, he was yet to see an ugly halfling. Why would I need something for a loss of memory? Yule asked her, picking up a shimmering white potion that swirled with glittering light. Pearlie laughed in a high-strung, anxious titter, her eyes still wide and smiled nervous.
Ah, well, you know, lots of things to do as a general. Some things may slip your mind.
Am I making you uncomfortable? Yule asked her, setting the bottle back down on the shelf. Pearlie held up her still leather-gloved hands.
Oh, no, of course not. I don't want you getting that impression of me. I'm just nervous to have someone like you in my store is all.
All right, Yule said, confused, and stepped over towards the counter. I was hoping to put in an order for as many healing potions as you could manage. I fear there may be fighting ahead along the road, and I like my lads to be well taken care of. Pearlie murmured, tapping the ends of her gloved fingers together, then pointed them towards the large wall of potions.
I have some right over there. Lots of them. They're pretty popular year-round, especially when everyone is this close to the orcs.
I won't ask for a bulk discount. I know this town is in need of money, Yule said, walking towards the wall and reaching out to tap a finger along a combat health potion, the glass wrapped in strands of strong leather. Do you mind being paid in guilders? Pearlie took off her gloves, coming around the counter and walking after Yule with quick steps.
Actually, I would prefer shanks. It is very hard to transfer high-value currencies out here. Someone may need change, and if I've only gold guilders to offer, I may lose out on their business.
I can arrange that, Yule said, turning and looking down at the halfling. I came this way with about 4 queen silver, so there should be plenty for you. Hearing that Yule had brought 4 queen silver nearly took the breath out of Pearlie's lungs. Queen silver was a small chest of coins, usually around 10 to 12,000 pieces per chest. Now that Yule saw the rest of her, he could finally understand what his men meant when they kept referring to female halflings as short stacks, as all the new recruits had been male so far. He also got why female dwarves hated them. Female dwarves had their own beauty, built upon a foundation of muscle and thick curves, but halflings were far softer, far more round, and it was like comparing sniper rifles to heavy machine guns. Still, he was not sure why this halfling looked so nervous around him, or why she kept failing to meet his eyes. Yule crossed his arms, bending at the waist slightly towards Pearly. I don't mean to be rude, but is something wrong? You have been avoiding meeting my eyes, and in human culture that means a few things.
Of course no, nor do I mean any offence, Yule.
Pearly said, waving one of her gloves nervously.
Just, not used to having celebrities in here is all.
Yule didn't buy it and lowered his brows. I don't really believe that, Miss...
Pearly?
Pearly answered, giving Yule a quick curtsy while her back began to prickle with sweat at Yule's tone. Yule nodded. Pearly, I have a feeling something is wrong and you are afraid to tell me. Pearly's forehead and upper parts of her cheeks immediately prickled with sweat as well, and she felt hot under her dress collar.
You see,
It's okay, Yule said with a soft smile, holding up one of his hands from where he had them crossed. If there's something wrong, I'd like to know. Pearly gripped her leather gloves and rubbed them together, her face flushing from nerves more than embarrassment, and looked up at Yule.
If I talk about this, can you not tell your wife?
My wife? Yule asked, then raised his chin. Oh, you mean Alavara. We are not husband and wife. We are companions, if that helps any. We have not performed any rituals of either planes to cement ourselves as such.
Companions, indeed.
Pearly thought to herself, having heard from Holcomb that they were far more than mere companions.
Well, you are aware of what she is, yes?
She's a valley elf, Yule answered, oblivious to what Pearly was getting at. Pearly hung her head back, closing her eyes.
No, not that part. The part about, what she is.
Is what? Yule asked her.
The red hair.
Pearly said, making a small rolling motion with her hands.
The red eyes, the mind reading.
Yule chuckled. Alavara isn't a mind reader.
You what?
Pearly said in a deadpan tone, fixing Yule with incredulous eyes.
Of course she's a mind reader. She's blood-touched. They all have this power.
Yule shook his head with a short laugh. Why does everyone keep calling her that? If she was a mind reader, she would be nowhere near me. We're just very in tune together, and she's very alert to my needs is all. We go together quite well in that regard.
That's because she was reading your mind.
Pearly muttered in her head, but she placed her gloves down on a nearby shelf, shaking her own curl-laden head at Yule.
Mr. Yule, all blood-touched have this ability. There is no way that she just happens to have blood-red eyes and blood-red hair, but not any powers. They are mind-eaters, dream-eaters, and thought-grifters. They can dive into the minds of others and get close to them and see what they think, what they dream. You can't hide any thoughts, nothing. They'll know everything about you.
I don't mean to be rude, but that is impossible, Yule said firmly, not buying it for a moment. No one can read minds. That's a bunch of nonsense. If Alavara could read minds, she would be throwing shoes at me every time she turned around to pick something up.
Goodness.
Pearly thought with a mental giggle, but rallied herself, steeling her face to Yule.
Mr. Yule, I am being serious here. I don't know if anyone has told you about them, but I know them firsthand. My cousin was blood-touched, and she could read minds. She even knew the genders of children before they were born.
Yule went to speak, but he noticed something odd about all the potions around them, and his mouth slowly closed.
Not to mention she always knew where I hid her gifts, and told Mother I was out frolicking with a rather, lovely Oni. And I knew I didn't tell anyone because...
Pearly went on, but snapped her lips shut when Yule held up a hand. Hush, Yule muttered, watching the vials and bottles around them. It was very quiet between them for a few moments, but Yule caught it this time. The liquid inside the bottles were all quivering at once. Be very quiet, Yule said in a hushed tone, taking a bottle and placing it on the floor. Pearly looked from the bottle to Yule with apprehensive eyes, her voice but a whisper.
What are you doing?
Shh! Yule hissed at her and watched the amber liquid in the potion carefully. He counted to himself, tracking the seconds, and then caught the motion again within the potion, the trembling flicker of vibrations within the liquid. Yule turned, sprinting out of the shop and shouldering through the door so hard it slammed against its hinges.
Mister Yule, wait!
Pearlie yelled out after him, running after the human and bustling out her warbling door. Counter battery harpies in the air, now! Yule bellowed, kicking up a deft trail of snow as he ran towards Hackholmes. Everyone on post to the west, on the hop! Pearlie skidded to a halt as dozens of harpies dropped whatever they were doing and lunged into the air, flapping deeply as dozens of auxiliary troopers snatched up their weapons and rucksacks, sprinting off through the snow.
What is going on, Pearlie?
Zarin called out from her porch, having been playing a board game with troopers that were now sprinting off into the snow. Pearlie stared around her with panic in her eyes, stepping backwards and forwards to get out of the way of running soldiers.
I don't know. Yule was just looking at potions and took off.
Yule crashed through the front entryway of Hackholmes with a bang of its doors bouncing off the walls, and he howled as loud as he could to those within. Artillery is ranging us. I want all NCOs to the west with their units. Form a battle line within the cover of the forest. I want that mortar battery up. Soldiers, both human and not, leapt from their chairs, snatching up weapons and sprinting out past the doors with Yule. Get a line dug in. Get the warcasters moving that fucking soil. Yule called out, then stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the fresh plume of snow rising into the air only 600 yards away. Alphonse, a lone wanderer who was a past artilleryman, pointed out towards the plume, his breath coming out in puffs of fog.
Those are 105mm howitzer rounds coming in at a hard angle. We're past their range.
Not for long. Yule growled under his breath, then heard the melodious clanging of mortar plates slapping to the ground. He turned, pointing to the crew setting up. Get those positions sandbagged in and spread out. I don't want repeats of tall wheat.
Where are the spotters?
Alphonse called out, coming down behind the front porch of an eatery and looking out into the snow.
Who is reporting where these things are landing? There's always a forward team.
The answer to this came with the war screech of a Himalaya melee specialist. The harpy coming down out of the sky like a snowflake from hell. Yule knew that all he had to do was wait, and sure enough, a Himalaya came flapping over towards him bearing the dripping, entrail trailing torso piece of a southern elf, dropping it with a wet splat in front of him. Good to see you again, Vitka. Yule said with a nod towards the Himalaya harpy. However, I recall you still weren't clear to fly. Vitka's face blushed furiously as Yule remembered her name, even as blood still dripped from her wing claws and talons.
Medics say Vitka good enough to fly.
You threatened to eat her, Yule said in an airy tone, stepping over towards the shredded southern elf, the face of which looked like it had been run through a grain hopper. Vitka tapped her gore-slicked wing claws together.
Vitka wanted to come on mission.
Were there any others? Yule asked her, patting down the pockets that were there and looking for a notebook of any kind. He also didn't see a radio, which troubled him greatly. Vitka shook her head with a bright smile.
Nope, no radio either, just signal mirror.
Thank you, Vitka. Back up you go, Yule said, giving her a pat on the head as he started opening the dead elf's uniform top. Vitka smiled happily, then took back off into the sky, trailing bloody snow behind her. Another boom thundered in the distance, and Yule leaned up to look at the snow plume.
That one was at 700 meters.
Alphonse called out, setting down his binoculars.
They're maxed.
They'll outrange our mortars, that's for sure. I didn't see any other team when I scoped out into those hills.
Chicks piped up, having jogged over to Yule with a grimace down at the dead elf.
Jesus fuck! Why did the Himalaya have to be so messy?
Birds of prey like to play, Yule murmured, then sighed as he wiped his hands on the man's body. Nothing on him. Looks like they've learned. Pearlie rounded around the corner of the eatery, saw the ripped-up body, and let out a shocked squeak.
Erin's mercy, what happened to them?
Yule ignored her, waving a hand at her to go away, and she quickly ran back around the corner. He turned the chicks, pointing out towards the snow plumes. They feel confident enough to try and range us, which means they are confident they can repulse a counterattack. Not to mention, I don't have to tell you what size combat unit drags fucking artillery with it.
I'll get everyone on point and spread out.
Chicks said with a nod, then jogged off towards the rapidly forming trench line within the trees. The gun line of the first cab formed quickly, stretching all along the town of Limstory and even further beyond down the road, snaking along the tree line that fell away from both the town and the road. By the time the sun began to set, First Cab was deeply entrenched and the mortars had bracketed the entire easterly approach to the town. Rotations were put in place to allow the auxiliary troopers to rest within the warmth of the inns. And it was here Yule found himself when a startled cry erupted from outside in the late evening darkness. Yule lurched to his feet, Alavara quickly falling into step beside him as they both marched out onto the front porch of Hackholm's. A gaggle of lone wanderers were holding out their hands and shouting at a bunch of startled auxiliaries.
Don't shoot, these ones are ours.
Bubba Bing called out, pointing to 30 Longclaw gnolls who were wearing, oddly enough, silky shorts and plate carriers. Buckwheat Bing, Bubba's brother, smacked a rifle out of the face of a female Longclaw, the Oni auxiliary having not been too trusting of her snarling grin.
Knock it off. They're gonna be our fucking guides and know what's up with that artillery.
Both of them were a pair of brothers from New Jersey, and when not gambling or cooking on the line, preferred to operate at night and terrorize the enemy via whistling rockets. Yule noted with a smile that First Sergeant Erinda Caine had chosen her humans well, as the other lone wanderers were just as insane as the two brothers. He recognized Fritz from his huge, stupid mustache and Willie, one of the new recruits from the group of prisoners. Fritz was an army engineer while Willie was a Black Hawk crew chief, both of them finding far more fun with the lone wanderers. Erinda Caine marched out a few seconds later from the inn, and she smiled brightly when she saw the humans in the distance.
My, you brought quite the haul home. Here, I thought you were going to come stumbling back to us with only a handful.
Her smile faded slightly when she saw what the gnolls were wearing, and she quirked a brow.
What an interesting choice in uniform.
Good gods above.
Alavara said with a snorting giggle, pointing to the Longclaw gnolls.
They are just wearing shorts and the armor vests.
Yule saw what she meant, and he wasn't really sure how to process it. The female gnolls were wearing only a plate carrier with nothing on underneath, and both sexes were wearing only the shorts, no underwear apparently needed. It was here that Yule thanked his lucky stars he told the tailors and weavers how to create the mesh inserts, or things would have gotten a lot floppier. Oh my giddy aunt, Yule moaned, running a hand down his face as a bustier female Longclaw scratched at her chest while looking around at the town. What have they done? Fritz looked over to where Yule was staring, and he hissed out through his teeth at the female gnoll.
Hey, quit it. We talked about this.
Sorry.
She said in a gruff, melodious voice, and she folded her hands in front of her plate carrier. Willie snorted, stepping over towards the porch of Hackholm's.
Yeah, sorry, boss, but we had to, get creative in order to get them over here. Been a hell of a trek through.
These lads and ladies can run for miles.
Bubba Bing said with a groan, popping his back.
And they don't sleep very much. We got here as fast as we did because they were, excited.
A male gnoll stepped up, saluting Yule as best as he could manage. Longclaw's here to kill for Yule. Glad to have you, Yule said, giving him a salute back in which the gnoll seemed to swell with pride, and he was reminded of the Himalaya harpies. Bubba, you mind finding these fellas a place to bunk?
Can do.
Bubba Bing said with a salute of his own, then waved a hand to the gnolls.
All right, you lot, inside or outside?
Outside!
They all cried out happily, high-fiving each other and pointing towards the long line of campfires along the trench line. Bubba Bing shook his head, sighing out unhappily.
Of fucking course.
Willie jogged over to the porch and quickly took the steps up to Yule, giving his Mark 47 mutant a shake to get the snow off of it. He shook Erinda Caine's hand, only coming up to her chest due to his Thai heritage, then turned to Yule.
Alright, so, don't be mad.
Too late, Yule muttered, crossing his arms. Why aren't they wearing a uniform? Willie grimaced, holding out a hand and waggling it back and forth.
They don't do clothes.
They don't do close.
Erinda Caine asked, setting her hands on her cocked hips.
What do you mean they don't do close? Soldiers need to obey the rules and regulations of the uniform standards. Lone wanderers withstanding, of course.
Domino chose that time to walk out onto the porch as well, bowl of soup in one hand and a spoon in the other.
Who doesn't do clothes? Someone running around naked out here?
The gnolls these fool brought in are not wearing clothes. They're only wearing plate carriers and silkies. Yule said angrily, his eyes staring into Willie's. Domino turned around quickly, spying the marching figures in the distance.
Real shit. Hey, Bubba, hold up.
Yule watched Domino, balancing his bowl, run after the lone wanderers and gnolls in the snow. He then turned back to Willie. Explain.
Well,
Willie started, leaning from one foot to the other.
we had to both get them to wear something at least, and they were a bit rocky on the stuff we had to give. So we told them we told them the plate carriers were special enchanted magical vests made by you to stop bullets. And the silkies were worn by only our most potent special forces and had the lifeblood of warriors in them.
Yule slapped a palm to his forehead while Erinda, Caine, and Alavara chuckled into their fists. You have to be fucking kidding me.
It worked, didn't it?
Willie said with a bright smile. Yule pulled his hand away from his face, but closed his eyes in aggravation. How long are they working for us?
These sons of bitches signed up for life.
Willie said with a happy laugh, then turned, hopping down the stairs to run after Domino.
Domino, wait!
Yule then turned to Erinda Caine, who was still quietly laughing into her fist, and he pointed a bladed hand at her. This is your fault.
My fault?
Erinda Caine blurted out in a chuckle.
You just said go get the nose. So my lads went out and got them. Not to mention a good number of them. And this will draw in more of them as volunteers. This is a mission success if you ask me.
Yule growled in his throat at her wordlessly, then wrapped an arm around Alavara and started walking them both towards the doors. I need a drink. The next morning, Yule was walking along the snow by himself, not wanting to risk his men getting hit by random shrapnel should a round fall in. 200 yards behind him, he had LP stationed out in a wide spread, their eyes sharp and looking for anything coming in. He found what looked like some kind of old rock carving, about 3 feet high, that one of the town's children had daubed in gaudy paint. Yule pulled the radio to his face while jerking down his scarf. Mark this TRP Charlie 9.
Copy.
The motor team leader said over the mic, and Yule pulled his scarf back into place. He had marked 8 of these points so far, and it worried him something fierce. He had a mind to try and send out a scouting team in order to attack the artillery battery, but knew that if they were failing to hit him now, they were well over 10 miles out. If he sent out men to try and attack, they could be easily outflanked and surrounded, and he didn't even have the harpies to spare for such an attack. This meant that he was stuck here. The road out was bereft of cover, a barren stretch of snow and mud for nearly 3 miles. Ahead of him, the ridiculously thick trees still blocked the road on all points, Roych had said before, which left Yule with one option: dig in deep and play the long game. Yule didn't see any other obvious markings, so he began to trudge along the snow back towards the wood line, squinting an eye at the long, ragged scar in the earth that marked his fighting line. What a horrible position. While there were trees, they were not thick enough for his liking, but it did provide overhead cover to some degree. Worse was that the townsfolk had been busily clearing all the underbrush, which meant that his troopers stuck out more than they really should have, only having maybe a quarter of the obscuring foliage that there should have been. To compound his frustrations, this kind of battlefield was controlled by the temper of the enemy artillery, but there was still a flaw he could take advantage of for as long as he could. Yule came down into the tree line and stomped across the snow, jumping into the trench line with a thud of his boots. The auxiliaries around him saluted across their chests with their fists. The more subdued field recognition of both him and the sergeant majors, and he made his way towards a large gaggle of humans in the center of town.
We have to go out there and take out that artillery,
Reed said, the only lone wanderer with the audacity to drag a Verdesian Auto 5 through the veil.
If we stay here, they'll just pound us into the dirt.
Staff Sergeant Huff rolled his eyes, a foot shorter than Reed but twice as stout.
You want to go out on a long-haul ambush across a snowy plain? What are you, retarded? You'll be 12 miles away with no support, no backup, and no chance in hell of surviving.
He's right, you know.
Ben said, scratching at the trailing of the beard he was still trying to grow.
You get caught out there, you ain't coming back.
Reed rolled his eyes.
Why is Rat giving me chuff about going out on an attack? Shouldn't you be burrowing into the trench line and hiding acorns or something?
No need for that, Reed. Decimus muttered, chewing on a long stalk of hay he had plucked from the stables. History has shown that trench lines can survive a hellish amount of shelling.
Strong talk for someone who was just trying to kill us only a season ago.
Reed said with a bristle, and Decimus eyed him hotly, his hand resting on the tactical gladius he carried. Molo held out his hands between Reed and Decimus, more for Reed's sake as he knew Decimus could tie the other man into a ball, and spoke out in his calming Australian accent.
Hey, fellas, calm down now. I looked after the trenches myself, and I think they'll hold up well enough.
Both of you are wrong and right, Yule called out, pulling down his scarf with a sharp tug. All of the humans backed away a few steps respectively, those who had been prisoners tilting their heads in recognition as Eris and Chikily came down beside Yule, fluffing out the snow from their feathers. Cody has looked over the terrain, Yule started, but stopped as Moose held up his rather large hand. Yule took a deep breath in as Eris stood close to Yule, her shoulder bumping his hip. Yes, Moose. Is Cody the guy who was the guy who... Moose said, but his eyes went into an annoyed, wide glance as he tried to find the word. What the fuck, I just had it in my head. Yule leaned forward slightly, eyebrows raised. Land surveyor? Land surveyor, yes. Moose groaned out, slapping his forehead. God damn it, I kept thinking of land measurement. Everyone snorted around him, except for Ben, who tried to not get on Moose's bad side. Yule chuckled as Chikily squinted at the word itself, not knowing it neither English nor Tunka. Yes, our combat land surveyor. He went off on a little trek and came back to let us know we have a long, rolling set of hills between us and whatever is shooting at us. He's pretty sneaky for a civilian-turned-militant.
Is that good news or bad news?
Kemp asked, scratching at his stomach idly. Yule shrugged. Neither. Just means there is only one avenue we have to worry about when it comes to recon elements trying to spot for their artillery. He turned, pointing out past the trees. There are 2 hills which allow someone to look down onto our position, and Vitka found one already. He was apparently using a signaling mirror to speak in a daisy chain of signalers, helping walk their artillery in. Even then, they are still too far out, which means that they will be moving them likely all day today and tomorrow.
That fucking sucks.
Willie muttered, crossing his arms over his plate carrier.
They can just pound us into oblivion then. We can't go back the way we came, and the road is still blocked by those fuck-off huge trees.
Millsirp, perhaps the oddest human in the troop since he commissioned that weird leather animal mask that looked much akin to some kind of wolf, took off his mask and laid it down across his chest.
Which means we are looking at shelling, followed by assaults.
No one asked you, furry.
Fritz muttered, kicking snow at Millsirp, who in turn kicked snow back at him. Chikily pelted them both with a snowball at Yule's pointing finger of a command, and they settled back down as the humans chuckled around them. What's going to happen is we're going to do our best to delay their recon units. Yule called out in a tone that said, "Shut the fuck up before I hit you with a stick," and he gestured back out towards the snowfields. The last leg of this fight is going to happen out there and along the flanks. We're going to establish LPs and OPs all along the main approach to our lines and out on the wings towards the roads. The forward OPs are going to have one goal in mind: watch for probes. We will be probed, and Yule pressed his lips together as nearly all of the humans around him began to snicker, and Yule pointed both of his hands and finger guns, Eris and Chikily throwing snowballs respectively when he moved his thumbs. When the laughter died down, Yule continued, "And we will be prepared for it. Eventually, someone is going to get eyes on us. It is impossible for them not to, and they will slowly begin to dissect us with accurate artillery fire."
Yule?
Egg asked, holding up her hand. Yule turned to look at her, as she had been hiding on the wings, and he had no idea that the woman had even joined them. Odder still was that she wasn't in with the prisoner detail either when volunteers were chosen. Egg was a pale Canadian-Filipino woman that normally palled around with Gremlin due to their affiliations with technology, and she had snuck out onto the battlefield with First Cab after hiding with the rest of the Lone Wanderers. "Who are you?" Yule asked her, and everyone's head snapped around to this hidden Lone Wanderer. Most of the Lone Wanderers had no idea who she was either, as she had been hiding as much as possible, but those who snuck her in tried to mask their hidden humor. Egg's raised hand faltered down a few inches, her expression now suddenly nervous.
"Oh, I was one of the prisoners taken during the Battle of Oars. I actually decided to revoke my choice of being folded into the private sector."
Isn't she the one who's making kids' books?
Killjoy asked, now recognizing the woman. Egg nodded.
"I made a pop-up book in English, yeah."
"Why is an author out here?" Yule asked the group, then crossed his arms. "I need riflemen, not artists." Egg shrugged her shoulders, her borrowed K2 rifle wobbling across her second-hand plate carrier.
"Because we're meeting the cat people."
"Ah," Moose said, nodding his head. Willie snorted.
Yeah, that fucking checks out, doesn't it?
Yule breathed in deep, trying to resist the urge to pinch his nose, but kept his eyes on Egg. "All right. He narrowed his eyes at her plate carrier's name tape. "Egg, what is it?"
"Well, I only made a contract with the Fae to get out of the hot zone in Canada, and I'm not a military strategist whatsoever."
Egg started, placing her hands together in a way that begged for a pardon.
"But why can't we just go out and attack the artillery?"
Yule held up a hand as other humans went to either also ask the question or explain why. "Egg, these cannons are able to strike out to nearly 12 miles. We'd have to send out units to try and fight an artillery battery as well as their defenders, and they could be easily cut off from help or supply."
Not to mention, they'd be trying to fight under the artillery and mortar umbrella,
Alphonse said, tracing 2 fingers over each in arcing swoops.
They'd risk shelling from both sides, and being at risk of getting rolled up into a kill pocket.
Yule nodded in agreement. "Same reason why all our LPs and OPs will need radios. If we need to mortar the enemy, they have to get pulled back with a quickness. However, Egg does bring me to my next point. They will be shelling us, and likely assaulting us. I expect them to use both the orcs and anyone else they've suckered in to soften us up before the true assault," Yule said, gesturing out towards the entrenched gun line. "They'll have to come at us through the trees, which they may shell before doing so to attack us. When we're under attack, they're going to try and set up observers, which our harpies will be attempting to counteract." Yule sighed, placing his hands on his hips. "Over time, we will take casualties, either wounded or dead, and they will become secure in their possible victory, moving up their lines. It is then we will need an SOF to try and finally take on that battery." All of the Lone Wanderers' eyes lit up, and they began leaning in towards each other. "I am hoping to convince Royce to let us hire some of his stagling brethren to help us, either by hauling sleds or teams of skiers," Yule said, holding his hands flat and in line with each other. Tandem teams of SOF wearing skis or laying in low-slung sleds will be hauled by these staglings through the snow on a long arcing flank in the hopes of not being seen. We will be attempting a trident. The lit-up eyes became a little wider at the mention of the battle plan, and a few looked a bit hesitant. A trident? Yule, that means there are going to be gaps. Decimus said in a cautious tone, looking down the road where he knew the fallen trees lay. There are always 2 gaps in a trident, and it can leave the center prong prone to getting flanked. Yule nodded his head slowly, his lips pressed into a line as Eris and Chikily looked up at him.
What is trident?
Eris asked, her wing claws tapping each other nervously as she felt the mood change amongst all the humans due to this human word.
Is like special tactic?
Yule looked from Eris to Egg, who seemed to have the same question on her face, and he held up 3 fingers. A trident is a method of battle where 2 prongs head to either flank, reaching out to try and find a weak point towards the center. The center prong then has to bear the weight of the battlefield and try to hold while the 2 other prongs work their way in. In this scenario, the left prong will be deep striking into enemy territory during nightfall, while the right prong sets up and tries to open an avenue for us to spread out further.
I assume with pickets set out to defend the engineers,
Fritz said, rubbing the end of his bushy mustache between his thumb and forefinger.
This flank will be spread thin, but just enough men to support probes by the enemy.
Unfortunately, yes, Yule said, folding his arms again. I have an inkling they will focus on wherever I am. They did this before at Mysterium, and I have little doubt they aren't trying to remove me from the equation again. Yule looked at Molo, stepping towards him as Eris and Chikily kept by his side. Molo, I need you to double and triple check our lines. If you need to buy lumber from the locals, I'll make it happen, but we need to make sure we can survive the shelling we are going to get.
Not a problem, boss.
Molo said cheerily, holding up a finger.
I think I have just the idea in mind.
And that's the end of Chapter 4 of the Veil Rider Book 4, Strength of Spirit. If you like these stories, and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk, comment down below, join the Discord, join the coffee for sneak peeks and teasers and all that fun stuff. Until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Rue, that was Mech, that was Vynn, Hailey, Simba, Fire, Eliza, and Technoward. We'll see you next time.